Well, welcome to this week's episode of Off the Top Rope, and we're going to talk about the man who started it all for me, my grandfather, George Shadrick. Now, Grandpa Shadrick was a huge wrestling mark. He went to shows every chance he got. As a matter of fact, he had what is one of the holy grails of wrestling collectibles. He had a Georgie pin. Now, a Georgie pin comes from Gorgeous George, and he would wear these hairpins to the ring and take them out of his beautiful hair and throw them into the crowd, and my grandfather caught one. And that was a fairly rare thing, and he was pretty proud of that. And I kind of need to explain a little bit about Grandpa Shadrick. Now, I'm a step-parent adoption, so he's not biologically related to me, and he was only 5 feet tall. However, he's one of the strongest human beings I have ever met in my life. Like Stan Lee, superhuman, strangely strong. He used to entertain the children in the neighborhood by lifting the front end of his truck up off the ground 3 times every morning as exercise. Now, I know a lot of you are probably thinking, well, leverage-wise, it's impossible. By the time you grab the bumper and pull it up enough to get the suspension up to be able to lift the wheels off the ground, there's no way you could get the leverage. Well, remember, Grandpa was short. He didn't grab the bumper. He grabbed right underneath the hood like this. And then he braced his legs and he pushed that suspension up as far as it would go using his legs, and then he lifted it up off the ground. So there was kind of a trick involved to it based on how short he was, where a taller guy couldn't get up under like that to get the leverage needed to actually overcome that. Well, he worked at Mare Island Naval Shipyard, and he did stuff like this all of the time, and he kind of became, talked about. And I'm not really sure because I was very young at the time, but somehow his strongman tricks brought him to the attention of a couple of local professional wrestlers, actually some big stars, Pepper Gomez and Wilbur Schneider. And Wilbur Schneider actually held the AWA title at one time. And they were very impressed with my grandfather, and he was very excited to actually know these professional wrestlers. Well, he never got into wrestling because, of course, he was very small and no one even thought about him until the feats of strength. And by that time, he was, well into his 50s. It wasn't like he was going to train to be a wrestler anymore. But it just made him more and more excited about the whole thing. And we would watch big-time wrestling every Friday night. We'd go over to my grandparents' house and we'd be watching that just before we left to go home. It was, one of the last things on. And at that time, I got to see some of the most amazing wrestlers from that time period. People that you hear about all the time, but I actually got to see wrestle. I got to see Pedro Morales wrestle. High Chief Peter Maivia. That is The Rock's grandfather. I watched him wrestle every week. The Spoiler, really awesome bad guy, used the ropes to his advantage with every move that he did. The tag team that was my favorite tag team, and it was really strange because they were the bad guys, but I just thought they were great. They were called the Blonde Bombers, and it was Ray Stevens and Pat Patterson. And they would come in and they would beat the unholy snot out of these prelim bums, and I mean wipe them out quick. And their finishing maneuver was a knee drop to the face from the top rope called the Bombs Away. And they'd just get in there, beat the crap out of the guy, give him the bombs away, and they'd roll out of the ring and they'd go to interview him. And Ray Stevens would be like, I don't want to do the interview. The whole reason why we beat these guys up in a minute and a half is I come here for one reason, to get paid. Now it's time for me to go to the bar, have a beer, and smoke a cigarette. Give me my money and let me go. I just thought that was the greatest attitude. It's like, they don't pay me by the hour. So, they were just tons of fun. And Haystacks Calhoun, great big, huge muscle guy, big fat. Talked about Pepper Gomez as well. And I would also like to give a shout out to a guy that I remember. His name was Jerry Monty. And Jerry Monty was one of Big Time Wrestling's prelim bums. He came out and he lost every single week. And I remember him, and I would say to my father, why in the world would this guy come out every week, Dad, and just get the crap beat out of him? And my dad would say, well, because they pay him a lot of money, David. So that's what I was thinking. You know, you get paid a lot of money to get beat up in pro wrestling. Well, then the sad day happened. And that day was the day that Baron von Raschke came to town, or actually he was leaving town. He'd been causing terror all over, and it was time for him to go. And in his last match, at that time we didn't know it was his last match, he put the iron claw on some poor unlucky guy. I don't remember if it was Jerry Monty or not, but he wouldn't let go. And he's got the iron claw on, and there is blood dripping out from every single one of his fingers, just dripping everywhere, and he won't let go, and he won't let go, and they're threatening him, and there's referees are trying to pull him off, and guys are coming out from the back, and the promoter's telling him, if you don't let go, we're gonna suspend you for life. You're gonna be suspended for life, and he wouldn't let go. And he said, all right, you're suspended for life, now let go, and he still wouldn't let go. And that's when Mom walked into the room. So here's Von Raschke in the ring, all these people pulling on him, blood everywhere, the guy's face, the crimson mask. I'm like 5.5, 6 years old. Yeah, that was my last wrestling match on television for quite a few years. So while that was a tragedy and I didn't get to watch wrestling, I still kept up with it for years and years. We would go over to Grandma and Grandpa's house all of the time, and lots of times there wouldn't be anything to do there. You know, it'd be the middle of the afternoon and it would be raining, and Grandpa had a workshop, you know, his man land, and it was filled with thousands, literally thousands of pro wrestling fan magazines. And I would go in there and I would read the magazines. I can remember when Flair was in the plane crash, because it was all over the news in the wrestling magazines of that time. And the debuts of all these, and Mr. Wrestling 2, I wanted to see Mr. Wrestling 2 as much as I could, because I read about him all the time, but he didn't, you know, I wasn't allowed to watch wrestling. So I kept up that way for a lot of years. And it really gave me a background, and it gave me a good look into what was going on and how they promoted and how kayfabe was run in those days. And, you know, the days of those kayfabe magazines were pretty cool. So I'll tell you a little bit later on of other things that have happened to me that, you know, were my formative years getting into pro wrestling. But really, this is the thing that got me on the path. Well, I hope I reminded you of some of these guys, and maybe you can go on the internet and look up some of their matches. They aren't flashy like they are today, but they're pretty cool. Have a great day.